I actually couldn't figure out where I was this time. It's like it was somewhere down there on that list of things underneath our. I'm like, I can see Michael. I'll just go ahead and put him up.
Hey, yeah, that's
You
all
can
right.
do the whole thing today.
Ace before beauty. That's all right.
Hey, don't know what to tell you.
I'll take it. Hey, well, I wanted to real quick. I told you I was going to give you little economic updates just for about
yes.
10 seconds before the show. Let's test your economic prowess, your government Overwatch economic prowess. We know how good you are with politicians and everything Oklahoma, farming, ranching.
You're scaring me. Stop
dark
doing
money, corrupt politicians, all that good stuff.
Yeah, okay.
But
so move on.
But does the number 369 billion, does that ring any bells for you?
Well,
Here
it's
just
not
recently, within the last couple of years,
it's not the
369
debt.
billion.
So I'm going to go with what we've given to what's its country for war.
No. That was 369 billion. That was the famous Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Do you remember that? They spent $369 billion to reduce inflation, to give
Because
us.
if you add money to the economy, it always makes it better.
Well, when you just print fake money on top of all the bad stuff. But anyway, what I was going to say about that, remember, I mean, they have no problem spending $369 billion to reduce our inflation, which is literally almost out of control. It's really getting ready to get bad. I mean, housing is bad. Building permits are bad. I mean, I could go on with all these stats. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But remember, Jenny, what a fit everybody threw for the border wall. How much was the border wall? Do you remember that? It was only like what, 18 billion, 19, 20 billion, something like that, 450 miles.
Yeah.
And I mean, they went ballistic. They have no problem spending 20 times that, which only increased inflation. I mean, it's such a joke. This government is such a joke. The banking system, all of it is so terrible. But anyway, I'm glad we got Mary from Visit coming on, because it just warms my heart to bust pedophile ring type people, child abusers, the whole 9 yards.
I hope Mary's going to put up her little badge that says V1SUT.
Yeah, Vantage. She's got to hit stop cam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, it just burns me how financially wrong this country is. I mean, it is just insane.
Well, don't we live in an upside down world?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we live in an upside down world.
Yeah.
You know, all you have to do is look at Walt Disney to realize how upside down. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like maybe between the ages of 6 to all the way up to 13, maybe even a little bit older. My sister and I on Sunday evenings, The Wonderful World of Disney would come on, and we would have tomato soup and our little grilled cheese, and we'd get to sit and eat on our lap on the couch. It was like the most exciting thing in our whole worlds. It was so thrilling. And I wouldn't let my kids watch a Disney movie now to save their lives. So just, upside down world. All right. Well, let's bring on Mary this morning and say, good morning, Mary. How are you today?
Good morning. Good memories. After Disney was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
It was. It totally was.
Where the narrator sat in the Jeep and sent Jim out to fight wild animals. I remember that. And Michael, I've tried to just write an extra $1 million into my personal checking account ledger, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't know how the government manages to do that.
Yeah. Aren't they lucky?
They are. They certainly are. Well, good morning. It's good to be with you again. And we have 2 interesting stories to talk about today. One is a step into the past. Okay. And one is very, very current. So, and they are actually surprisingly connected in the way that we're seeing non-transparency in a lot of our institutions.
What? Are you serious? Government agencies not being transparent?
Well, they don't actually even have to be a government agency. They can just work under government funds, and apparently those policies apply.
No, I thought the whole job of government was transparency.
Yes. But I can also say it's also a message of encouragement because
Good.
we see some encouraging things happening. We are in interesting times for grassroots groups and parents groups stepping up and taking over some roles that used to, frankly, be the media's role to keep these institutions in line. And it is both fascinating and inspiring.
Well, let's get started.
Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is a series that we started 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a bit on your program back then. It is essentially started as the story of a group of women who were attempting to report child sex abuse within the school that they attended in high school, out in Little Axe public schools. They were reporting these things to the State Department of Education starting as early as 2020. And one very brave woman, her name is Ashley Rowland, really took the charge and was trying to report these things. The first story sets the stage for this and tells the story of her and of Miss Rowland and another friend who took a trip to Padre Island on their senior spring break trip and were followed, according to their reports to the OSDE, by 2 coaches. And as we moved through the story, we gave convincing evidence from the girls' statements and corroboration and tracking documents that they were drugged and sexually assaulted by educators and coaches at the time, public educators and coaches. We tracked the job paths of those reported abusers, and the communications flooded in. It was like a dam of silence was broken. It's really like nothing this publication has ever experienced. There was support for the victims overwhelmingly. There were also other disclosures of abuse, both in that district and across the state, unrelated. So we began to see a real pattern of abuse and how it had perpetuated. The story just became bigger than itself. There were educators reaching out from 2 different camps. A lot of them, great educators, were saying, well, it's about time. We need to talk about it. We need to really say how these perpetrators were able to move from district to district. And then there was another camp who wanted to disassociate themselves from the story. So the publication did get some very official looking communications from some who wanted to disassociate. And I will say, of course they would. This is, if you're working in public education, you don't want to have any part of something that harmed students. So we thought it would be with discernment that we pause and engage everyone who is interested in a conversation. Look into some of those other reports. Really get the facts before we moved forward with anything, and we knew we were doing it the right way. So there were a lot of interviews, a lot of evidence gathering and confirming, but now we are back. We are back, and we have reposted the very first story that we're calling Part 1 that went back up yesterday.
Good.
And we'll be moving on with it. So the new reports that we're finding really reinforce some policy issues. When we get right down to it, there are some, I don't know if you call them policies or practices. There are some practices within investigation of internal abuse within school systems that have been perpetuated and taught and generationalized.
Okay.
That
I see where you're going now. So you're just saying the policies and procedures put in place for a kid basically to come forward and say what's happened is itself causing the problem. Am I getting the right?
You are.
Right? Okay.
You are. So in this case, it's a very interesting case because just our first person who stepped up, Ashley Rowland, and she may be on here today.
We have a large crowd, so she could be.
There's a misnomer that these victims don't report at the time. And sometimes that is the case, that children don't report sexual abuse, particularly by someone who's gained their trust, gained the trust of their family, is within a trusted institution. So that does happen, but there are many times that they do report, and the channels of reporting are so illustrated here as not what they were intended to be or what they're required to be by law. So Ashley Rowland's mother worked within the school district. She was the registrar there at that time for, about 20 years. So she was very much familiar with the school district. And she did report this. She reported this to both the principal and the superintendent at the time. And there's a feeling that these things are taken care of once a parent reports to the school. And we're finding that that's just hasn't been the case. I want to talk a little bit about the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education, because we're seeing some very different things from this administration than we've seen in the past on this issue. After sort of decades of lip service to the issue of abuse inside public education, they're taking a really different and public approach to protect kids first, then investigate, and to do it out in the open, which is really shaking some leaves off the trees across the state, because the districts are really required to follow that lead. They are in 15 months, just 15 months of this current Board of Education in Oklahoma, they have either suspended or revoked or taken actions against 32 teachers and certificates.
I'm not sure if we should be happy about that or sad. I mean, that's...
Well, what we've learned is they're working into the past.
Oh, okay.
Things that should have been revoked or suspended, and that they're also now working active investigations. One of the things that came out from the story of these women, particularly Ashley Rowland's story, is that no one was moving against teaching certificates. No one was following these perpetrators from place to place. And there's just a major policy gap. I want to call it a policy and practice gap, where administrators, and honestly, 2 months into this, I think that they thought they were doing what they were supposed to do, because historically that's what happened. An accusation would come up and immediately the accused educator would step down. Not fired, not even brought in front of the board, their local school board, would step down. And the thinking among our current generation of administrators is once they step down, number one, it's not my responsibility. I'm no longer sort of investigating what this person did here. But I don't have any control of what happens next. And that's been policy within the school, but it does not align at all with law. Law says that, our state law says that anyone who knows of suspected or known child abuse or neglect must report it. They have to report it to the child abuse hotline. They've got to report crimes to law enforcement, according, that involve children. But that's not what's been happening. And my first thought in this, always be thorough, was sort of how could they do that? How could they let these people move on? But I think what's happened more often than not is even good administrators, the folks stepped down and they felt like it was out of their hands and these people walked on. Now, not always. I'm not going to assume intent here.
Well, let me, because I'm still having a little trouble grasping this. So you're saying that the administrators, so the accusation comes forward, the teacher, the coach steps down, then the administrator goes, okay, done. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's crazy.
It is. But it is the move that has perpetuated this. And as this story went forward and we tracked, there were 2 men accused in this of sexual assault. And as we tracked them, they continued to hop from place to place. And when either a new accusation would come up or an accusation from the past, from a previous district that was unknown when they were hired into their new district would come up, they would step down. That was the practice over and over and over. So it's not just one bad decision by an administrator. Somehow, some way, this has become how public education operates when child sexual abuse comes up.
That is not okay.
It's not okay. And there are cases where it looks like non-transparency. It looks like we don't want the scandal. It looks like, no scandal, no charges kind of a thing. But then there are also credible administrators who felt like they were checking the boxes that they had been trained to check.
Interesting.
So it kind of goes back to, there's a bigger discussion here. Who is training these administrators, right? There's an organization that trains these administrators.
I think we know who that is.
Exactly. Where do they go for legal advice?
Well, of course they go to the OSSBA or COSA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what are they teaching? So there's a much bigger picture here than just what happens at one district. Also, that brings us into, we talk about the OSSBA. There's discussion now at the state level that maybe we should be looking outside and allowing school districts and local school boards to obtain training in different places, not just there. And I think
didn't we run a bill like that 2 years ago that got Bupkis, got nowhere?
Yeah.
The answer is yes, we did.
Yes. But I think stories like this start to educate people about how important that is when we start to centralize the training. And they're flowing into organizations that are not non-political. These organizations are very political. They have PACs, they back candidates, they have agendas that are beyond the safety of children.
But they're nonprofit. Don't talk about a nonprofit organization like that.
Well, we're actually going to talk about some other nonprofits today. So, but I do want to say that it's encouraging that this current state school board, instead of these things happening behind closed doors and we don't know what's been reported at the OSDE, they are working them straight into those regular meeting agendas. You can watch on Facebook when Facebook Live as they're meeting, they're addressing those things. They may step into executive session for a minute for legalities, but they're not abusing executive session, which we've seen a lot in the past. And they're taking those certifications, or it's setting them aside in suspension until they know if a person is safe. So that's incredibly different and encouraging. They also actually have investigators. So that's one thing that came from particularly Ashley Rowland's story. She approached the State Department of Education back in 2020. So we were under a very different State Board of Education then. And she was met with some promises that the investigation was moving forward. After about a year of being very persistent, it was sort of discovered that there were no investigators and that there was no investigation.
But if you say it, what is that? If you say it, they will come.
Yes, that's exactly what was happening there. So to her credit, very intelligent and tenacious young woman, in 2022, they finally said to her something to the effect of, we don't have the manpower, we don't have an investigator. You can investigate this and you can send us all of your evidence. And that's when she spent 2 years reaching out to all of these other then girls that she went to school with and collecting statements that were submitted to the OSDE. It took her 2 years. And finally, when those were sent in, it was 2023, July of 2023. And I can confirm the OSDE does have investigators now. They are playing catch up. They can't release a lot about their investigations, obviously.
Yeah.
But they are on this investigation. They are looking into every accusation and every statement that these women put forward. So,
well, and I think it's important here to point out that aren't all the coaches that have been implicated still working in public education?
Not all. There are quite a few victims that came forward in this, witness statements. Not all are still in public education. Some have stepped out for varying reasons at varying times, but some are, and they're playing different roles across the state, but they still have access to children. So,
and I want to just make the point real quick. You know, Jenny, you and I hit on this a couple episodes ago where the superintendent in Edmond was upset about that reporting system that was put into place by the SDE. It's for that exact fact that they cover and wash all this stuff away with their internal investigations at all these school districts. That is the MO. That's how they've been able to get away with all these things for so much time, is because they just sweep it under the rug. And we need that external person, that external investigator, or that external agency to come in to actually keep these people accountable. So you've got to, I just want to tell everybody, I mean, if you have any kind of issue, I would just go straight to that reporting system on the SDE's website and start something.
And I've forgotten, what is it called again? Awarity.
It's called the Awarity system.
Awarity.
And it actually was a system that was started as an anti-bullying reporting system, but it has grown to where anyone with any concern about anything in public education in Oklahoma can make a report, and that report can be anonymous. So it's critical so that we can bypass, if these laws are not being followed, any concerned citizen or parent can report. And it wouldn't be a bad idea, if you've reported something of concern to your school, to also put it in the Awarity system, because it gives another layer, and there are investigators now. My understanding is they're very overwhelmed at this time, but they're working to catch up. So we're making progress for sure. Jenny, would you mind going to the next slide?
Oh, not a problem.
Because we're really right deep into this next discussion. So this story became much, much bigger than Little Axe very, very quickly. It became more of a focus on how did this happen as opposed to what happened. But moving forward, we're going to let each one of these women who wants to tell their stories.
Good.
Because it's a fantastic illustration of what needs to change if we're going to be serious about protecting kids. Now, the internal investigations, that's a big area. There's this false assumption that people have not reported to schools. And what we're finding is often they have. Also, the privacy laws or the privacy policies are interesting. So these investigations get reported to the school. And what we're finding is all of the policies protect adults. They're not protecting children. And I'm not saying that there isn't a role for protecting the privacy of an educator, but this really brings up a needed conversation.
Good night.
If you take a job where you have the responsibility and oversight of other people's children, there needs to be some expectation that you lose amount of privacy in your work. And we've lost that explanation. I happened to cover sort of town hall forum that there were several legislators that spoke at this forum, and then Superintendent Ryan Walters spoke. And he was asked a question about the reporting of child sexual abuse in schools and concerns about that. And he went into a very passionate speech about a particular district that he left unnamed, who had an accusation against a coach who had grabbed a student's backside. A female student's backside. And that came through the Awarity system, and they requested the video of that because there was video in that area of the school. And the school system came back to the OSDE, not the media, not me, not someone else asking with a sorry privacy policy, you can't see that. They came back to their oversight agency and said, you can't see the video because of the privacy of this teacher coach. So this is happening across the board, and they believe, the communications people, their administration believes that that's their responsibility, is to protect that person. Now, we see video of things gone wrong in schools across the country. So this is not everybody's policy. We do see those things. We see videos of fights between students that they release. We see video of all kinds of things inside schools. But he made a really good point. Teachers push back about this. But why don't we have, now that the technology is so incredibly inexpensive, cameras in classrooms that parents have access to? Just like at many, many child care centers now. I know someone that sends their dog to puppy daycare, and they have a camera that she checks in on her dog. Yet we don't have that kind of transparency in schools with our children, who are our most precious of relationships. So he brought up a very great point about this.
Well, let me go back to a video that we did just recently. There are several things that lawsuits are primarily in the forebrain of so many of these administrators, and they think to themselves, I don't want to get embroiled in a lawsuit.
Yes.
It's more likely that the teacher is going to sue because there's a union there that's going to support that kind of thing. So they basically defer to lawsuit, right? I mean, where is the biggest pushback going to come? Well, probably the teacher through their union, because that's why so many teachers join. But then you also have, on the other hand, you do, because I've told this story before on this podcast where I had a kid who said I did something that I didn't do. And you can be put in a position like that as a
Yes.
teacher where you have a student say something about you that just flat isn't true. And then, how do you prove that and get out of that? So there is kind of a tension there between, I didn't want to have something said about me that wasn't true, but then I would want to protect a child, especially those that are, being, in the middle of some kind of sexual predation thing by a crazy person. So it's tough.
It is tough.
And then you have the parents who don't want to, because Michael, you and I have talked to parents after parents. I don't want to report it because if I say anything, then they're going to take it out on my kid.
Yep.
So I think that goes back to the awareness thing being probably the best thing ever, because yes, I'm sure, somebody can report something that isn't true because you can do it anonymously. And that's why so many organizations and schools don't like doing that, because they will have people who will abuse the system. But then what always ends up happening is, for some reason, the lever only goes one way. So they'll go, well, we'll have people reporting and doing bogus reports. So we're just not going to do it at all.
Well,
that doesn't work either.
No, it doesn't. And I would say when we start to inject common sense into that debate, our children are worth wading through false accusations and gathering evidence.
Of course.
And we should always presume innocence when we hear something about a teacher. If we can trust in the process of the investigation, and we can do that, we can presume innocence if we trust that these accusations will be transparent and they will be fully investigated. And that really is where we are right now. This story really shows that we've divided into two camps, and there's been this massive erosion of parent trust over time. They haven't put child safety first, and parents are pushing back. And that's where, as I mentioned before, these grassroots groups are now pushing back. It's very interesting to me. We have a generation of parents now who have kids in schools who actually grew up not knowing what media's role is supposed to be in this. They grew up in the CNN generation, and they don't really realize that this was the role of the media. The media stayed on top of these things. They didn't just throw a headline and a couple of sentence story when something came up, refuse to disclose anybody's name in it, go along with whatever policy the school had and dig further. They really reported on it, and our kids were safer for it. So now we see these parents' voice groups, the Moms for Liberty groups. They are doing that work through social media, and they're putting pressure on schools to be more transparent, which I think is a very big driving force in the change we're seeing in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Well, parents are going to have to push back. There's nobody else that can do it. I mean, we've tried to do that for over a decade, and it just doesn't work. I mean, parents have to be the ones that are going to take the lead here and get this done.
Yeah, but I will say real quick, Jenny, on behalf of parents and from ROPE and kind of our capacity, if someone still just doesn't feel comfortable, even submitting something anonymously, I'm more than happy to, and I have on behalf of several parents submitted awareness records or awareness reports and open records requests myself, for them. So, I mean, that's something that we will do for people. Even if they just want to completely try to stay out of it, I will do that on behalf of them.
Very true.
That's a very valuable offer because it is very real. And we're finding as we interview people around these cases, we're finding that smaller communities, it's even more risky for a family to come forward.
Yes.
There's a handful of people in power. And as we move to
Yeah.
sort of the next story, which you can flip to the next slide, that's probably a great transition.
Good.
We see that in some of these smaller communities, not that Shawnee, Oklahoma is a small community by any means, but it's not the biggest. In the rural areas, a lot of times you have the same people serving on the school board, that serve on the city council, that have the money and resources in the community, whose son happens to be the sheriff. And the persecution can be very multifaceted when you speak out against one. So it becomes more important than ever to have somebody like you, Michael, that they could go to and be able to report some things or to submit some evidence to those investigators at OSDE to support what they're doing and make sure kids are safe. That's a fantastic point. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a more current story. Did you all happen to read recently, a few weeks ago, when a 9-year-old boy at Horace Mann Elementary School out in Shawnee, Oklahoma, was served a victim's protective order ordering him to stay away from a female.
A 9-year-old.
At school. So this is not your normal day in 4th grade. At school. The order, the petition that was submitted to the court and was signed by a district judge there, stated that there was domestic violence involved, checked boxes on stalking and harassment. And the media grabbed it and sort of ran with this narrative that something big must have happened between these children. This must be a 9-year-old that's very much out of control. They interviewed KFOR, grabbed the story first, and it's a perfect illustration of how these things spread verbatim.
Yeah.
They grabbed it, they scratched the surface, they interviewed the grandmother of the child, who's not the legal guardian, and they interviewed the mother of the girl, and the mother's the one who submitted the petition.
Well, I'm just going to say the news media are just lazy. These people are flat lazy. And part of it is their higher ups say you have to get 5 stories done today, or you're fired or whatever. Well, how are you going to get 5 stories done in any kind of timely fashion that really mean anything? So you have kind of a two-edged sword on that too. Some of them just flat don't want to take the time. They've not been trained. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. They have not been trained in journalism school to go out and do an actual interview. They've not been trained on how to do an investigation. So they don't even do that. They just throw up their hands and do what they can before, their producer says, well, I got to have that story in 5 minutes. So I mean, that's why what you do and what we try to do is, it's invaluable because we take the time to actually look into things, not just scratch the surface. So I just wanted to make that point because I have no love for corporate media and neither should anybody else today, frankly. It's entertainment.
I agree. And I will give you a personal anecdote. A local chain of publications approached me about doing freelance work for them, and their contract required 4 stories a day. Minimum 4 stories a day.
How are you going to do 4 stories a day and make them make any sense?
You're going to do exactly what happened in this situation in Shawnee. KFOR put it out. KFOR put out the story, and every national news media picked it up almost verbatim. They change a few words and then they put it up, and they may or may not link back to the publication. I know this because it's happened to me. I've written work that people grab and then they put up on a national publication and they give no credit. So if you think about how many times someone got paid something for spreading an incomplete story about this 9-year-old boy, it was on Yahoo. It was on MSN's feed. It was
clickbait.
It is. And you think about a 9-year-old boy who's now living in a not so large community where people are thinking these things of him. So this is one that immediately I personally was on because something seemed not right. The undersheriff, his name is Dinwiddie, Travis Dinwiddie, was personally there to serve the order.
Din or dim?
Din, D-I-N. He's the undersheriff, and he is running for sheriff currently. So this is pretty timely information for the community of Shawnee.
No kidding.
He claimed on the KFOR interview that he had to serve.
Yeah, just following orders. He's just doing what he has to do.
That's it. He said the court signs these orders and we have to do it. So one of the things that in our response article was that that's not true. The law gives great latitude to law enforcement in serving these kind of orders and other orders. There's an entire code that says you can look for alternate locations. You can engage other law enforcement agencies as you look for those. They can even hire a private investigator. Now they knew where this child lived. They knew who this child's guardian was. It was at the school, and they didn't do that. But he claimed that he had to. And I want to call that out because we don't need law enforcement overstepping their bounds. We contacted the school and asked if they had advance notice, if they knew that law enforcement was coming. Was their school resource officer involved? And the answer was no. They did not know that they were coming.
Interesting.
And the school resource officer was only engaged after the sheriff's department was on site and the child had already been served, which kind of makes us question what the role is there. And then the undersheriff had also said in KFOR that he had made sure that the family was notified in advance. That statement is a stretch. He did not contact the family. The family was contacted by the school principal, and I give her credit for this, before the child was served. The sheriff's department showed up and she immediately tried to contact the family and say,
that is good.
What's going on with your child? So his statement was inaccurate. He did not insure himself. They showed up and the school took that initiative to say, this is going on. You need to know. You probably need to be here. So this story had layers and layers of adults at the school level, at the court level, at the law enforcement level that were sort of incapable of handling what turned out to be nonviolent conflict, almost just interaction between 3 fourth graders. So we began to cover what really actually happened. And you can go to the next slide. In the real story, the school, which this seems to be a growing practice, instead of having sort of a tiered, adhered to discipline policy, has made these things called stay away agreements their standard. So when there's a conflict between children or something goes on, a behavioral issue, they independently call in certain circumstances, the student and guardian, and they must sign a stay away agreement related to the other child. So Jenny, you were a teacher. Is this anything that was practiced during your time in the classroom?
Not at all.
It's interesting. There were 3 students actually involved in this. There were 2 boys and a girl, and they all had to sign a stay away agreement. There was nothing violent sort of involved in this, but they signed the stay away agreement.
The parents
remained in the same classroom. It's very vague. Remained in the same classroom. And I'm not sure how you go through 4th grade avoiding each other when you're in the same classroom. So it was a bit of an unrealistic situation. And then the protective order came when the boy was walking down what they call the 4th and 5th grade stairwell, which is right by the office, and is reported to have cameras in the area, while the girl was about to head up the staircase. And the mother of the girl claims that the boy blocked her in some way. There was no pushing, there was no shoving, there was anything like that. She contacted the school, and then a chain of events happened where she ended up filing for this protective order. We requested from the school any video of the incident, and we were told due to privacy policy that we were not allowed to have it. So do you see how this is a small thing is being blown out of proportion? The other thing is that KFOR and everyone else who was involved in this story that published this story initially had access to, we know from what they reported, they embedded some documents from the court. They talked about the documents from the court. And no one seemed to notice that the mother was represented. Her communication was going through a nonprofit called Project Safe. Now, Project Safe is a Shawnee organization, and they serve, I believe, Pottawatomie and Lincoln counties. They are funded with public funding through the Attorney General's office and also through two funding sources at the U.S. DOJ, the Department of Justice.
Good night.
Yes. So their main function is to serve victims of domestic violence. And that's what their website talks about. They assisted in preparing this petition that was then signed off by a judge. On the form for a protective order, it lists the statutory definitions of domestic violence, of stalking, and of harassment. And it very much says these terms can't be applied to anyone under 13 years old.
Wait, so are we on Common Core math and people don't understand that 9 is less than 13?
Exactly. How did this make it past the bench? They also stipulate a certain relationship that has to be there to claim stalking and harassment and domestic violence. So it's a relationship that involves dating. It involves sort of the intimate relationship. These are 9-year-olds. So on so many bases, this was an unlawful order. So we have to ask ourselves, how did it happen? We contacted the nonprofit, and guess what? They can't even confirm that they assisted the mother, even though their name's on court documents, because of privacy.
And even though they're funded by tax dollars, though they're a nonprofit, I'm sure they fell back on the nonprofit status too. You know, hey, we're just a nonprofit.
Yeah, and let me make one more little point on that privacy fallacy. And Jenny, you know this better than anyone. Look at the amount of data collection in these schools across the board that violate every piece of privacy you possibly have, and they make a profit on it.
Yep.
Talk about privacy.
That's an excuse. Great point. The same situation where we're protecting the privacy of the adults within the system,
right?
But your children's data is farmed and used consistently. Another aspect of this is concerning. When you bypass the statutory relationships that are needed to file a protective order. So a protective order, there needs to have been a familial relationship. You know, we have a conflict within the family. There needs to be, or a romantic relationship. You know, this is the ex, this is something like that going on. Or now a residential relationship. You're living within the same house and there's some huge conflict. If you don't have one of those relationships at play, which obviously among these 9-year-olds that are classmates, they don't, then you claim something else. You claim the harassment exception, and you need to provide a police report to back that up, that there was actual solid evidence of harassment. So the police report in this case was provided by the Shawnee Police Department and was not included when the family was notified and served with the court documents. So the family went to the Shawnee Police Department and asked for the police report related to this order against their 9-year-old. They were told, because the birthday of the child was off on the order and they only listed the child's initials, that they couldn't provide the report.
Wow. Okay, that's a Fifth Amendment violation right there.
That's a huge issue we're seeing. So this,
yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like schools. They'll take your tax dollars, they'll steal your home from you, but by God, they will absolutely do anything they can in the world to protect themselves.
It's very interesting. So we played citizen of Shawnee and said, we're asking for this information. And we put in an open records request with the Shawnee Police Department. There was no response until the day the article hit. And within hours, we did get back a response. And then we got back a rejection And then we pushed back and we quoted the law and said, this is not the law. Then we got back an acceptance, but it required us, even though this was just by mail, send me one report, which lots of law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma do so well and so promptly and so completely. So I want to say that this is not everybody. Then we got back an acceptance, but it required us to go into a system, pay a fee that is beyond what the statute allows, and we had to give all of our personal information. So we decided, no, we're going to pretend we're citizens of and play the role. If this was happening to us, how could we fight back against this? And we went back and we communicated more with these people, and they finally provided us the report, but just the front page of it, and not the entire statement of the mother who filed the report that reported the report. And that becomes part of the official report. So there was some wrangling back and forth. And by the time they responded, an attorney by the name of, I'll say this wrong, Joy Miskell, or Miskell, I'm not sure, so I apologize to you, had stepped up pro bono when she saw the story and came to this family's defense and filed a motion to dismiss and a motion to seal the record. So this judge, the picture here is Judge Tracy McDaniel in the 23rd District. She ran unopposed last time. She's the one who signed this order in the first place. And she then had to sign a dismissal of her own order. Now, this attorney only had to point out one thing. You can't do this to someone who's under 13. She didn't even go into the depth that we did in the article, and it was immediately dismissed. But once that happened, the Shawnee Police Department came back and said, sorry, we can't completely fill your open records request because now this case is sealed. So there are all kinds of mechanisms happening here that are keeping people from knowing how our public tax dollars are making decisions through all kinds of agencies. And nothing that I've ever covered shows more than in this case. But I want to get back to how exactly did this judge sign this order that said all the statutory definitions are on there to help prevent frivolous protective orders. They're very common in custody cases and divorces, that people are throwing these things back and forth that aren't warranted. We even have in the domestic violence law that this falls under, there are even statements about frivolous protective orders. You can end up paying fines. You can end up paying for the defendant's costs if you're found to have filed one of these frivolously. Yet she signed off on this. And we would love to know what the relationship is between this nonprofit and this judge. Does this nonprofit, this judge knows the law. She's a judge. And she's an attorney. She knows the law. Did she not read it because they sign everything that comes from this nonprofit, domestic violence nonprofit?
No.
I don't know. We don't know.
Well, maybe she went to public schools. Maybe she went to Shawnee public schools, and what I think maybe their reading level is like 40% proficient or 30% proficient. I don't know.
Well,
maybe that's what
I think this judge needs to follow her own advice and stay home, because it'll save lives if she just stays home and quits being a judge. Honestly.
Good point.
Well, and honestly, our job is not to pick on any public official, but when decisions like this are made, we need to look into who's making those decisions. Yeah. And when we did start to look into it, she has significant conflicts of interest with anything that involves Shawnee Public Schools.
Imagine that.
She has a regular intern from Shawnee Public Schools that comes, and that's a great program. Don't have a problem with that, but it's a regular tie. Her husband is a 6th grade teacher and coach for the district. Her sister is a teacher and coach for the high school. So this happens in smaller towns, but as we were looking into it, timing be what it is, her husband was currently on administrative leave related to an awarity report. So
interesting.
We did several interviews around her conflicts of interest, and that was going on at the time. So we reported that most of the news will typically, the school had put out a statement saying someone was on administrative leave because an awarity report said that they reported to have viewed on their phone an inappropriate video during class time. And I want to err to the side of caution and say, we presume everyone innocent. There's a lot of room in that kind of a scenario for a misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
Like law enforcement will say, someone said a baby was crying outside in the snow and it turned out to be a cat, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely want to presume innocence. The school informed us yesterday that he is still on administrative leave. The Shawnee Police Department jumped right up after the article and became very involved. So the school had apparently reported this to the police department. That's a very good step in the right direction. Trust in Shawnee schools is not great after the Ron Arthur incident. And that's a lot where those parents groups came from. The reporting was non-transparent, and the court documents related to that civil case are hair-raising. There are many victims, and there was a discipline policy for teachers that did nothing to protect kids. So parents have a right. Parents have a right to know more, and the school is going to have to be extremely transparent under its new administration to build that trust back.
Well, I'm going to go even further. I mean, those schools are funded by us. Every taxpayer needs to know how that money is being spent.
They do. And when a teacher, like you said, is accused of something, we need to err on the side of protecting children, investigating, and being sure, having oversight to those investigations, which is nice because now the OSDE is involved. The Shawnee Police Department said they were contacted by the district, and they immediately put out a statement within a very short period of time saying that they looked into the incident and that, quote, no crime had occurred. So the police department is looking at this from a different perspective than the school is looking at this, or should be. A crime in this incident would be that a child had viewed pornography in the classroom. Okay. So,
but they can read about it in books. So never mind.
Isn't it interesting? Yes, that's interesting. So that the Shawnee Police Department has a statement saying that didn't happen. No crime occurred. As of yesterday, the school informed that their internal investigation is not complete and that he is still on administrative leave. So they are communicating.
Well, that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And there's an oversight agency involved.
Say that.
Right. Exactly. So there are different things. The school is going to be looking at what policies were broken. And as parents commented on the story when it was posted, okay, but why are you even on your phone in the first place while kids are, and why are you watching a video privately of anything? I don't care if it's, cute dogs or something inappropriate. So they're going to be looking at policies, I'm sure, but we don't have any answer yet from the school's investigation or the OSDE investigation. But conflict of interest for a judge who has immediate family in her household, it's very difficult to say that she should have been ruling related to this protective order.
Right.
Quite an interesting situation.
And I would bet Shawnee probably has maybe 3 judges, I would think.
I think they have 4.
Yeah.
I think that they have 4. She's an associate district judge. So she was first appointed, and then she ran, and then she ran again unopposed. Yeah. So that's something that people need to be aware of, and we'll see if any statements come out. The court so far has been approached by all kinds of outlets and hasn't made any kind of a statement about this. So you can really see in this sort of legal fiasco, privacy policies at all levels. The school won't show the video. The court's not giving the parents the full police report. The police aren't giving the parents the full police report. There's a nonprofit that can't even talk to us. We don't get to see how these decisions.
We shouldn't even be involved. How should they even be involved in this?
It's a really good question. Is that grant money? Federal grant money has very specific guidelines about its usage. So it would be interesting to see under those 2 different Department of Justice funding streams, if this is outside the purview of the money that they were granted and the tax dollars they were granted. Nonprofits are very much involved with this community's schools.
Yes.
They have, the Avitas Foundation is giving grants to a couple of different nonprofits that are directly involved inside the schools, training teachers in social and emotional learning models. So I think parents need to know more about what's happening with nonprofits. So one thing that people don't understand when they just see a hit and run story like the media did on this 9-year-old boy is that.
So Catherine Clement has just to interrupt you a second,
Yes.
has a question about, so apparently the boy and his sister and another boy, they all lost their ability to attend school in person. Do you know if the girl has to stay at home?
Here's what I do know about this, and this is something that we clarified. We went back and we updated the article. We stated that the Shawnee Police Department has found that the judge's husband committed no crime. And then we also reported that 3 students were suspended over this incident. There were the 2 boys and the girl, 4th grade girl, all of them in 4th grade, who had signed the stay away agreements. And when the court order was issued, it became impossible for the school to accommodate that court order in the 4th grade. All students, because they'd signed that stay away agreement, were suspended for the remainder of the year. And it was a big deal. They had an award ceremony coming up. They had a little school basketball intramural thing that 9-year-old boy was really looking forward to. A hardworking mom who works 2 jobs, who had bought him basketball sneakers and scraped by to do this for this. So they are all 3 home for the remainder of the year. The sister of the boy is also home. I am not aware of whether that was ordered by the school or if that's the move that the family took. It's a very good question because of a lack of trust, because of what had happened at school. Yeah. So they are also, right now, education's on hold. They are picking up paper packets at school once a week is what was offered to them to continue their education through the end of the school year. They have to come back and do their state testing all alone, separated from other children. So this turned into
over a 4th grader blocking a girl on a stairwell.
Yes, and even the statement that the written statement that the mother provided to the court, which we were able to get, there was no violence. She claimed that there was some profanity that had happened in a public park, not even on school property. She called it violence, but there was never any indication of violence between any of these students. The boys' family said the girl was often seeking attention from the boys, pulling on their hair, pulling on their clothes, passing notes, things that 4th graders do. But that was the extent of it. I cannot explain how this order happened, but I think it's about more than Shawnee. It's a wake-up call for us about transparency under public funds.
I agree. I mean, this is goofy.
It is goofy. So the last slide is really a reiteration of some of the things. Without the grassroots groups involved, I don't believe that we would have known much about this, that this would have slipped under the radar. So they're doing a pretty amazing job of working with the schools, demanding transparency, demanding improvement. And they are working directly and have a lot of communications with the schools. So I definitely applaud them for that. Questioning the roles of the nonprofits in the school would be my next thing. What are they doing there? And is there equal non-accountability?
And I remember, Michael, do you remember when we talked to Gabe Woolley, who's a teacher in TPS in Tulsa Public Schools, and he was talking about when he first got into teaching that all those nonprofits that he was involved in initially when he got into the public school system, they were all just absolutely falling all over themselves to push in DEI and SEL and all the just nuts social stuff that does not teach a child how to read or do math.
Well, and on top of that, look at what Julianne, told us about all the nonprofits and everything. I mean, that just going back and watching that video alone is priceless.
And I think we really need to just figure out a way to get nonprofits out of schools. I really do. I mean, if you want to go to a private school or you want to start your own school or whatever, that's fine. You have as many nonprofits come in as you want, but those nonprofits are completely non-transparent. There's absolutely nothing in rules or regulations or laws in Oklahoma that says that they have to transmit any information about anything that happens. They're non-elected. They're, I mean, completely outside of the bounds of government, except they're working in government directly with government. Because I'm sorry, a public school is a government school. It's all of the money is stolen from us and appropriated by the state government. They're government schools. So those nonprofits are actually working in government now, creating completely enshrouded activities, and it has to stop. I mean, it has to stop.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of that public-private partnership, where they just have free reign in there, and there's nothing we can do about it because they're private or, whatever.
That is a really good point. And now that you throw the safety of children into the mix, because we're talking about them, not just the one that's involved with the court over here that has to do with domestic violence. We're talking about children in schools. You should be aware that there are public schools who are not applying the same standard of background checking and vetting for people that work technically for a nonprofit within the public schools. And we're seeing cases of these, and we're getting responses from school districts saying, the same rigorous standard doesn't apply in this case because. And I think that's something we need to look very, very closely at. We have got to come to understand in public education that people who seek to do harm to children seek access to children. And this is another avenue by which they're going to come into the public school system. It is in the public school system's best interest to handle that head on. I also want to make the point, something that you said, Jenny, it wasn't nonprofits that were responsible for some pretty amazing progress in public schools that was reported recently. So the comprehensive school improvement designation is for the short version, the bottom 5% of schools, of performers of schools. And there are certain ways that they come about that. Now, there is extra money that comes with that designation. And so there's different cohorts of these schools. Every year has a different cohort. They have access to this money for a certain number of years, and they all sort of roll and rotate through. Historically, the program has not been successful. Oklahoma public education has continued to decline, even though we kept putting more money into those schools. The announcement that was just made, I don't think people understand how amazing it is. This year in this cohort, 117, I believe, of 191 CSI designated schools have reached the bar to be undesignated. They've improved enough to move out of that area. That is massive. Last year, there were only 32 schools that were able to get off that list.
Well, though, I do want to ask you that question, though, Katie, because when I went to research some of that stuff, I was surprised at how that designation wasn't really based on academics particularly. It was also based on how many kids were actually coming to school, what the retention rate. I mean, there was a whole bunch of different other things that were considered when I looked at it some time ago. Now, I don't know if that's the case under, Ryan or not. I don't know. Do you happen to know? But I know it wasn't just academics that was considered.
No, I believe there are other variables to it, but I do know that state assessment scores play a big role in that.
Okay.
And that's an interesting discussion. So to make it brief, I have been looking in depth. A few years ago, I think it was back in 2017, they did sort of a rewrite of public education data in this state. There was a big controversy about letter grades. Public education did not want letter grades, A through F, applied to their schools. Huge uproar through the teachers associations. They didn't want it. So they took a couple of year pause on that. And then they came back now it's in the school report card system that you can get on the State Department of Education site where all this data is kept. And they did a big rewrite, and assessment scores for students took this back seat. You've got to drill down to get that. And an indicator named academic achievement took center stage. And what I'm going to tell you, if you go and look at how that's calculated, it's sort of a merge of identity politics and student outcomes. It starts to divide kids into these different groups, and it applies different standards of achievement based on those groups. Yes. So we have to be very careful. School board members are giving administrators raises based on these high academic achievement scores. You can have, like I'm looking at examples, an academic achievement score of 100% for your school site, and only 62% of the kids are proficient.
No, that's not right. Nope. I cry BS on that.
And that's a case that I'm reading from data right now. I'm telling you that that is the case at a school site in Oklahoma. They're not all as different, but you see about a 30% drop in the number because they mean different things.
Well, then why should we be so excited that these schools got off of the list?
Because that number wasn't based on academic achievement. Academic achievement is something that Oklahoma has embraced. But a lot of these CSI designations and things involve federal funds that are coming through to help those schools, federal and state funds together. So we just need to know, when you hear that you're at a high performing school, go to the state school report cards and dig through the data. They're looking at things called academic achievement. And I can look for you and tell you what the average is on academic achievement. But I want to say it is very low. You would be surprised. Talk amongst yourselves. Probably not.
Probably wouldn't be, but okay.
So let me look here. Academic achievement, the average is 47%.
Yeah.
And if you look at English language proficiency in the state, it's 33%. So there's always sort of a difference between that number and what kids are testing at. I'm encouraged when the schools got off of that designation. It wasn't because nonprofits came in. It was because there was some accountability at the OSDE level, the people that are assigned to those schools. They got back to the basics of education and started using real data. I'm encouraged. That is a watershed moment for public ed.
So you're saying they are actually using testing data now?
Yes. So a big part of the calculation of those schools that fall on the bottom 5% has to do with student state assessment scores. And student state assessment scores, public education doesn't really like them. You'll hear that that's not a measure of what kids can actually do. There's the pressure of the test, but there's a pressure of the test for everyone. So it's a bar. We know if we're going up or we're going down by this. And participation is incredibly high in those tests because your participation in testing your students affects your funding. So watching those numbers, not letting them slip behind things like academic achievement and academic growth. I'm not saying they don't have a place in the data pool, but state assessments should be brought back to the forefront.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. But I think I've always said, if you really want to know where kids are, you will give a test at the beginning of the year for basic knowledge that they're supposed to know by the end of the year. It won't be a huge test. You're just going to hit the basics. Then you're going to go through the whole year. And then at the end, you're going to give an exit test. It's the same as the first test. And if they score higher on the end test than they did on the beginning test, we have a thumbs up. Right?
Yes.
That we won't do that, because don't even get me started on testing, because it's an absolute money pit. And it's all about the two organizations that everybody wants to go through for testing. And it's simple nonsense. It's just simple nonsense. So, I never know. I feel like, teachers ought to develop their own test based upon their curriculum. And which of course would be the standards and everything else. That's kind of what I did in my classroom. We had kind of a little beginning test, and then we had an end test, and I wrote those tests, and I don't know. There are ways to do things, but there are a lot of people who want to complain about any good way to do things. So,
it is difficult, but I think that parents need to seize on this opportunity that we have right now with a state school board that is really listening to parents and looking at these actual measures of things going on. So you'll hear a lot of, when you watch the state school board meetings and you watch the live feed, first of all, the state school board meetings have not changed. They've been in the same building forever. And when the previous administration was there wasn't a line of protesters out the door. There weren't people camping out to get the few spots and saying, we need to move this down to Chesapeake Arena or whatever, so that these meetings can be disrupted.
This Thunderdome.
The Thunderdome.
So the insanity.
One teacher enters, one teacher leaves.
That's a constant demand. And if you go look at the public comment portion of it, they are being attacked. These school board members are being attacked and accused of some things that are just really off the wall and off topic. So I do commend them for standing firm and keeping their focus on kids. But those meetings, the comments within those meetings, Tulsa Public Schools is taking up a lot of time in those meetings right now because their oversight of the state board is intensive. Yeah. And you will hear comments saying things like, they just need to get out of Tulsa Public Schools and we need local control. What people don't understand when you look at these measures of data within the system we can all go into, you look at the bottom 20 schools in the state, the majority of them are in Tulsa schools.
Yeah.
And the next is Oklahoma City schools.
Yes.
The truth is, Oklahoma City schools should probably be there every month.
Yeah.
Giving a report. So there's some accountability. I feel some hope and continue to dig for truth. And I want to just make one comment about someone named Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Said she personally knows this 9-year-old child that was served, and it was beyond ridiculous and so traumatizing. So thank you for mentioning that. We want to remember that there's a kid involved here. And now there's 4 kids at home not getting their education.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so, we are in such a bizarro time because, when I was a teacher, when I was a kid, when I had my own kids, things have just escalated so quickly that it's just honestly bizarre. I mean, when we were kids, oh my gosh, think about the 3 of us when we were kids. I mean, we would have, I don't know, fights. I'd pull hair. I mean, and you'd get suspended for a day and come back. And it was just, I mean, it was never that big of a deal. I mean, kids don't always get along, and kids are emotional, and kids are kids, and okay, big whoop. But we make such a huge deal out of it today, but then kids are doing crazy stuff that we would have never thought to do when we were kids. And so it's like you don't even know how to respond to so much of this stuff. I mean, you just don't. It's awful.
You don't. The relationship between schools and parents has changed so much. I mean, when we think about even just the counseling portion of this, counselors used to become involved. This is going to be a shock to a younger generation. They used to become involved with the child when a parent would call in and say, something's going on in our home. Someone's terminally ill. Will you keep an eye on my child? And if you feel like they need to be pulled in, will you call me? That's what counseling used to be. Correct. So it's a perfect example of how things have flipped.
Yeah, because now they pull them out of class when the parents don't even know and talk about stuff that they shouldn't be talking about them with.
Exactly. I think schools could go a long way to build parent trust if the boundaries would come back again between school and home. So, yes.
Yes, but the sad thing about it is the Supreme Court has basically ruled that once your child is you drop them off at that school, the school has authority over them and they basically become their parent. So, that's a huge problem that parents don't even see. I mean, I know that there are good people in government education today. I know there are. I mean, there definitely are.
Yes.
But at this point in time, we have the OSSBA, we have COSA, we have all of these people talking bad things into good people's ears, and the parents are getting the brunt of this. I mean, the parents are just getting shoved out.
And don't forget, you've got basically in this state, you've got only 2 law firms that represent all of these schools.
Yes.
And the advice coming from those people, like if you're in a small town and you don't think that, these big town issues are going to come to you, they're being trialed, in these big cities. And then the same law firm that's representing Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Edmond or whoever is the same people that's going to be giving advice to your school board in the smallest little town in Oklahoma in a short amount of time.
You're absolutely right. And we see constantly that the advice of those attorneys is don't get sued, don't get sued.
Exactly.
And the schools have failed to fight the battles that protect kids. And Catherine in the comments is making another fantastic point. School resource officers are really interesting. She feels like they each should have their own officer as well. One of the things I want to point out is in these investigations, a lot of times a staff member is accused of something inappropriate with a child. It's reported to school and a school resource officer is involved in the investigation. So parents assume that means law enforcement is taking action. What we find more is that the school resource officer in his role at that time is working for the school.
Yes.
And that there is not a connection, and you cannot assume that that means your local police department is investigating this matter as a crime.
Yes. Yeah. And I can absolutely say that because I know that when I was mayor in Luther, one of our officers was under contract to the school as the school resource officer. And, absolutely that's the way it was. They didn't work for us then. We could call them back if we needed them at the school, but they were contracted to the school.
Yes. And therefore they answer to the superintendent in their day-to-day matters.
That's correct.
And they will fall under the investigation policy of the school.
Yeah. I wanted real quick to share this is the Department of Education's website. This is sde.ok.gov. You come on their homepage here and you literally just scroll down to this Awarity, this little logo with the butterfly and the letter A down here towards the bottom. That's the Awarity program. When you click that, it's just going to come right into this form and you just start filling this form out.
That's Will you click back one step? That is a great thing for people to know. If you have a concern in your public school and you want the state oversight agency to know, click back to your computer. The other thing that they every parent should be looking at on that website for the State Department of Education is the Oklahoma State Report Card.
Yeah.
You need to go in and swim in that data. What's happening at your school at a student level is probably not what you think it is. And then you will know what to bolster and where to work.
And that's the other logo on that page, correct?
Yes, it is. There's a right.
I think it just says report card on it. Let me see.
It says Oklahoma State Report or State Report Card.
Yeah,
Oklahoma School Report Cards is what it says.
Let me get it.
Yes, that is such a wealth of information.
So right there.
Yep.
You can't see my mouse on the screen, but it's just right there. We'll click on it.
2 up and 1 over from the Awarity system. these are your two biggest friends in the State Department.
Yeah.
And you can go in, you can look at your district, you can look at your school site, you can see all kinds of metrics about how they're performing, and they compare themselves to schools across the state. So you will really know your child's chances of coming out as proficient and educated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple different sections within that report card system that you need to look at, because like you need to drill down into one or two of those menus, and we'll probably just have to do a video on it, because the very first time you look at it, it may seem like your school's actually performing better, but when you actually drill into it just a little bit, like in the math or reading proficiencies, it tells a little different story with the actual levels there. So you have to go in just like one level into it.
So that sounds like something we may need to cover in a future month's meeting.
Well, we'll do that.
All right.
We'll stick that on the schedule at some point with, well, honestly, thank you so much for being on and telling us what's going on here. And I really honestly do believe that if it weren't for you hunting this stuff down, this just would not be getting any airtime at all. And, of course, my advice always is get your kid out of a public school. I mean, they're your kid. Why have them if you're going to farm them off to somebody 7 hours of every day? So keep them home. Just my personal,
No, we've got a lot coming at you on different topics, and we're looking forward to moving forward in our Harmful Coaches series and telling the stories of the rest of these women who've bravely stepped forward to protect kids.
Well, if you want to have any of them on the show and they want to tell their story, let's make that happen and do that, because I do believe, when I was in middle school, we had a band teacher, and he did some things that just made me like, I don't know, I was just, a kid, but it really raised my radar a little bit, and I was like, oh, I don't know about this guy. But, I think that's the problem with kids. And you brought this up before. Kids don't know what kids don't know. And we don't know what we don't know, but at least we know a lot more than kids. And I think kids have to be instructed in what is appropriate and isn't appropriate, because there's so many things. I remember I had a coach one time, and and everybody's just like, oh my gosh, he's the coolest, so if they did anything, you thought it was just cool. So, some of these things have got to be reiterated to kids, that there's a separation between you and everybody but your parents. And
it's a difficult
you got to talk to your parents about this kind of stuff, or your guardian, or your friends, or whoever it is, if you can't talk to your parents. But there's got to be communication there.
We've lost that message. Tell a trusted adult. We don't even say it anymore. I'm very anxious for you to read part 2 of this, because it talks about exactly how that trust is misused. And it looks very different when you're talking about adolescent children. The manipulation is heartbreaking.
It just is.
Yeah. And I just want to remind parents, those school policies do not override your parental rights. They make it like they make it out like you have to abide by every single one of their policies. That's for their own internal use. That's not for you. That's like the analogy I always use to people when they kind of say, well, I don't know. It's like you going into a bathroom at a restaurant. It says, wash your hands. That's for their own employees. That's not for you. I mean, yes, wash your hands. You should. But I'm saying you're not going to get arrested if you go into a restaurant, you don't wash your hands. It's the same thing. Their policies are just there to govern themselves, and they'll walk all over you if you let them.
Yep. Know your school board member. That's their job.
Excellent point. Well, thanks again, Mary. And we will talk to you again next month. And unless, we've got something and we need to do something special on it. So, we're always happy to squeeze you in where we need to. So you're just doing excellent work. And thank you so much.
Thank you all for always making this platform available to so much critical information. Appreciate it.
We're trying.
You are.
So thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Bye. Always love having her on. I don't think the public is, I really honestly do not believe that the public understands how important her role is specifically and what she's doing and how much of a public service she's doing. I'm fairly certain they don't know, but I do know, she talked about KFOR and about how they reported the story of the little 9-year-old boy, and then everybody just picked it up. We talked on this broadcast numerous times about how, if you write something, they'll pick it up because they're just lazy and they need to get stories out, and their producers are telling them they have to, and their bosses are telling them they have to. But it's funny about KFOR. So when I was fired from the state election or the county election board by the state election board, when I was fired and then subsequently told I was going to be investigated or suggested I was investigated, KFOR asked me for a soundbite, give me some information about that. So I actually did call the reporter back, saw it on, and we had a nice conversation, saw it on K4, and guess what they stuck in there? Picture of the Capitol on J6. Well, she was mayor of Luther at the time and was at the Capitol on J6, implying that there was something I did wrong.
Yeah, you're a domestic terrorist.
I'm a domestic terrorist. So, hey, I should be fired from the Oklahoma County Election Board. So it's just absolutely nonsensical. The way these people, it's all about sound bites. It's all about getting clicks. It's all about all of that. And they don't give a rat's butt about who they hurt in their story. It doesn't make them any bit of different. So again, pay attention to Visit. Don't pay attention to K4. Hey, just don't.
Well, that's true journalism at the aspect of integrity and check. And that's what journalism is supposed to do. Journalism is supposed to ask all those hard questions, look at every angle, not have a bias, and say, this is what's happening. Here's the accountability check on this public entity, and this is what's going on. I mean, it's so sad that, we just live in that entertainment world.
Well, and I'm so sad to see, Catherine has been such a great, she's had so many wonderful comments during this podcast. But so they went to the principal and nothing was done.
Yeah.
How many times does that happen?
Oh, yeah.
So parents are scared to say anything because then they don't want anything to happen to their kid. And they've told us this 100 times. But now Catherine's saying, hey, I went. And basically they went, whatever, and did nothing about it. So, Catherine, get on the Awareness system and file, make a filing. You should absolutely do that. So. All right, Michael, we have a phenomenal show coming up on Friday. We're running a little bit late this morning, so let's chat about that briefly. We have a couple from Lincoln County, where I'm in far eastern Oklahoma County, and our next door neighbor is Lincoln County. And we have I think it's a couple, but we're going to talk about it, a group of wind producers who are coming into Lincoln County and trying to get people to sell their property to create wind farms. And the more that we know about wind farms, the more that we know that they're extremely problematic on numerous levels. And it has been so gratifying to see this particular couple, Robbie and Jeff McComas, come out. Well, Jeff ran for my state senator because, I'm right next door, ran as my state senator, and he was not elected, sadly. Wonderful man. His wife, Robbie, is lovely. And they have been creating this huge awareness about what's going on in Lincoln County surrounding these wind farm people that are coming in. And if I know I can sound like a real I get frustrated with what's going on. And I think, why should we even bother to fill in the blank? But I'm telling you, you have to be here on Friday to watch this show and listen to Robbie and Jeff talk about what they're doing, because we may not be able to do anything about the federal government. And I really honestly think we may not at this point.
Yeah.
But we still have some control over our state government, and you have a lot of control over your local government, whether you think it's so or not. And if you choose to back off from that, you're really you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're losing so much control over your life by staying out of local politics. And by local, I mean in your county, in your city, in your backyard. So please join us on Friday and listen to what Robbie and Jeff have to say, and come be encouraged and get some information about what they've done and how you can do the same thing to attack similar things that might be happening in your backyard. So please tune in for that. Anything else going on in your world, Michael?
That's it.
That's all.
Yeah, I'm just watching how great the economy is and how much our money is just everything's at all-time highs, and we're the richest people in the world. It's great.
Went to the grocery store the other day.
Hello.
People used to laugh about shrinkflation. Oh, that's stupid. That's just dumb. No such thing as shrinkflation. Really?
Yeah.
Really? That's fascinating.
Hey, it's just an ounce here or there, Jenny. It's just an ounce.
My favorite one is coffee. My husband and I were talking about this the other day. We used to get like this big, huge Folgers can. It was like a huge, like from Sam's. It was huge.
Yeah.
And it was like $9. You get half of that now for $9. So you can say, oh, well, the price hasn't gone up. Well, yeah, it sure has. If you're getting half of the amount for the same price you paid, it's gone up completely double. People don't get it. So I hear you. All right, Mr. Michael.
All right.
Let's make one more pitch for you. Anybody who's watching, anybody who will be watching, please, if you've got a problem and you need to talk to somebody in your school, you want some records, you want some help, please contact Michael. His number's right. His address is right there.
Yep.
Give him a call, and that's what he's here to do. So he will help you out.
Happy
and
to
thank
do
you for helping me out today, as
Sure.
usual. I always love having you.
Sure.
You're the best. All right, everybody, we will see you again on Friday, and I want you to have a lovely Wednesday. The weather's coming in on Friday, but take advantage of today. It's beautiful. See you on Friday. Thanks for tuning in.